he's gonna talk about this book. I knew it.
I would have never thought you would have been an author.
Thank
Well.
you, Sandy. Already?
I think they're good though. I read both the other ones.
It's wonderful that you
And I
can
want,
discover a new thing.
yeah.
I saw a quote on Facebook yesterday, and I've heard this quote my entire life, and I don't know who it's attributed to,
That's his pen.
but my great aunt Tessie from the metropolis,
Oh, that's yours.
my great aunt Tessie from the metropolis of Echo, Alabama, who lived to be 101, had the greatest attitude of anybody in my family. And she used to say this quote all the time. And when I saw it on Facebook, I said, God, that's Aunt Tessie, you know. And the quote is, when there are some people that when they come into a room, you're glad they came. And then there's some people, when they leave the room, you're glad they're gone. And I've heard that my entire life, and I just remember her saying that all the time. So I hope by the time I leave, that, you know, you're glad that I came, and not want you push you out. Before I do anything, I have to thank a couple of people. First of all, Liz Simon, who is my editor, and I think you all know that Liz has been great in that realm. And then Nancy Smith, who has been tremendous in helping me. Both these ladies literally drugged me during my darkest, deepest days. Drugged me to these events, prayed for me, loved on me, and I love you, and I thank you so much for what you've done. Now Liz, I've known Nancy since 1995, I've known Liz since 1995, but I didn't know Liz. I knew Nancy a long time before I knew Liz. And it's funny how you work with people. Like we work together, we all work together at Blue Dog, but you don't know. You know, you work with a lot of teachers, you know, through the years, a lot of different people, a lot of different colleagues. And so I knew Liz was already a legend when I came to Blue Dog. She was already a legend. And
You can
so,
look at it like you want to.
yes. And so she already had this reputation, and so you know you just didn't go up and talk to Liz Simon, you know, without an appointment. I'm just joking, Liz. But you know, I really didn't know Liz that well, and then this whole book experience really started when Dr. Agnes Slayman suggested that I reach out to Liz Simon to help me with my first book. And so I did, and the rest is history. And I had no idea that they would even like it. And I did this, Dr. Slayman and Liz Simon, I said, please read this manuscript and tell me if it has a chance before we go into any kind of process. And so when I got the word from both of them that they liked the first book, I was excited. Now, the last time that I was here with you was March 2022. It's been 2 years since that time. Obviously, I was here then to promote this book,
That's right.
Storm in the Carolinas. But since that time, I've published 2. So it's been 2 years.
Wow.
The Treasures of Carolina Summer,
I've got it.
which Liz won't admit it, but I think it's her favorite because it's about Myrtle Beach, a lot of Myrtle Beach in it. And then What a Crowd, which is a football story loosely based on my career as a young coach, but it's fiction. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, since the 2 years have passed, some things have changed. You may not know this. I looked this up. Gas prices have gone down almost $1 since the last time we met.
You're kidding.
I know, that's hard to believe. They were around $4 a gallon back March 2022. So gas prices have gone down. We've had 53 earthquakes since the last time we met here in Kershaw County, which if you'd have told me that 25 years ago, I would have said that could never happen. At the time when we were having the earthquake series, I was speaking to this group back in March. We had just started the earthquake boom. And my sister was living in California at the time, and she was calling me joking about the fact that I was living in an earthquake zone. And if you'd have told me that when I was, first came to Kershaw County, I would have never believed that. But that's been funny. Another thing that's happened that I think is the most important thing is, since that time, is that Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift got together. That's the most important thing. In my personal life, we have a daughter who is about to get married in January, my youngest daughter, and so we're excited about that. Our grandpup, Jasper, is growing. He's 4 years old, and so he is the love of my life with my wife, Bridget. When we come home at night, Jasper is the first one that looks us in the face. So we certainly, that has been going on now since I saw you last 2 years. In the publishing business, for me personally, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have guidance from Liz. I have people that I've met. This has been so much fun for me. Sandy Fitz said it earlier. I never thought you'd be an author. And Sandy, I agree. I never thought I would be an author either. I've been a football coach all my life. And here I am writing books. A lot of people ask, what are you doing? It has saved me in a sense. The writing has been therapeutic for me, and getting out to meet different people has been so much fun. I've enjoyed, I couldn't even begin to tell you how many wonderful people I've met along this journey. Now, Liz and I were very fortunate 2 years ago. She had a friend down in Beaufort, South Carolina, who arranged for us to go to the Pat Conroy Center. If you've never been there, it's pretty neat. The museum about Pat Conroy. And the director there met with us to talk about the second book, The Treasures of the Carolina Summer. And to make a long story short, when we met, he basically said, Scott, I don't mean to hurt your feelings, but you're nobody in the publishing world until you are a published author, where you are traditionally published. I self-published these first 2 books on Amazon. And he said, you need to have some credibility. You need to be a published author. And he told me a lot of things that day, but that was the one thing that stuck in my mind. And I said, well, I'm going on this mission that the next book that I do is going to be published through a traditional publisher. And so I didn't know how you went about that, but it is a long and tedious process, which I now know why people self-publish, because it takes so long. And you have to talk to a publisher, you actually have to have an agent to talk to the big publishing houses. So you have to find a literary agent that likes your work. And you submit your work, and then they tell you it may be a year or 2 before we get back to you.
Wow.
So I'm getting on up there. I'm in the 4th quarter of life. And I'm figuring, well, I've got about 20 good books in my head. And, if I wait around for these people, it's going to be too late. So, I'm very impatient in that sense. And Liz is always telling me to calm down. But, I'm a little impatient. But long story short, I submitted one book, which is called In Roadwork. I also was in the middle of doing this one, What a Crowd. Now, What a Crowd is a football story, which we'll talk about in a minute. But in the time period that elapsed with no reply from any agent, I finished this one. And so, by luck, I met an author at a book signing in Bethune, South Carolina. Helen Bradley had just published her first book. And Helen said, you might want to reach out to my publisher. And she said, it won't hurt anything. So I did. I sent this manuscript to the publisher. The publisher fell in love with it, and thus we published this one. Now, the whole publishing game is a lot different than when I self-publish, because a couple of things. Number one, language. There are a couple of words in here that I would never use in my first two books. And I don't want to get into that, but there's a few of them. And I had no choice in that matter. The editor said, this has to be put in there for emphasis. And I said, no, it really doesn't. And we argued. So I had to learn that the publisher is in control. I also learned that the publisher gets 90% of the profit. You get 10%.
You're kidding.
No. That's how they start out. And so, that's the give and take of, okay, I'm a published author. So I have accomplished the goal. I have accomplished the goal that I am a published author. I can say that. I never would have dreamed that I would be a published author, but here I am, a published author. And so going forward, we have several books that we're going to try to publish here very soon. And when I say very soon, by the end of the year. And I'm excited. I have a sequel to this one that's already been done. And I also have one that I think Liz would agree is going to be a lot of fun, called The Coach's Wives of Dicey Creek. And, I think a lot of people will be interested in that one. And it's set in 2019, so we're pretty excited about that one. Let me talk to you about What a Crowd. What a Crowd would have never happened without the consent of the living college football coaches that are in this novel. Now, if you've ever seen the story, The Legend of Bagger Vance, the movie, the author uses real people, historical figures, in the novel. And so, I said, you know what, I think I can do that too. When I began coaching back in 1983, college football coaches, the head football coaches, could come to your practices. And I was a young coach, and I couldn't believe it. When the first time this happened, I would see these great college football coaches that showed up at our practices. And so I just thought that happened everywhere. I later found out, as I grew up, that they didn't go everywhere. They just went where the players were. They didn't just come to your practices just to hang out with you. But it was not unusual for me to see these great coaches back in the 1980s, before they changed the rules. And so one of the main characters in the book is Coach Danny Ford from Clemson, who is 81 years old and is on a farm up in central South Carolina. And I had to contact him before this ever got off the ground. I had to say, Coach, I've written this novel. I've included you in it. Would you give me your blessing to use it? Which is, not an easy thing to do. And I'm sure he must have thought I was a nut job when I called him. But when I did call him, he was on, I couldn't hear him on the cell phone. And he said, boy, you got to speak up. You got to speak up. And I literally had my cell phone, and I was screaming into my cell phone when I was talking to him. And I could hear this noise. I said, Coach, what are you doing? And he said, I'm on the tractor, boy. I'm on the tractor. You got to speak up. And so he was out there plowing, 81 years old on the farm. And he's a character. He is an absolute character and a gem of a person. So he read the manuscript and contacted me just a few days later and said, you have my blessing. And so from there, the next living great coach is at the University of Tennessee, Phil Fulmer. And I had to call him, and that was a long story, but he finally consented and allowed me to do it. It took me literally months to get in touch with him. He's like royalty in Tennessee.
Wow.
And so he did. And then there's Bill Kinney from Penn State, Ken Treadway from Virginia Tech, and Miles Aldridge from Clemson, who I had to get in touch with. I had to get in touch with these people and say, listen, would you allow me to use you in your book? Now, the reason I did this is because those men including Joe Paterno from Penn State and Bo Schembechler from the University of Michigan. I met all these guys when I was a young coach. And they would come through our school and do recruiting, and they meant so much to me, I wanted to include them in the story. And so they were all so gracious to allow me to do that. Now, I really can't get out and publicize the schools or their names, but without their help, it certainly would have never gotten off the ground. This book hit Amazon #1 in 2 categories about 2 weeks after we unveiled it in February. And so it's done really well on Amazon. And so obviously people who like football like it, but it's more than a football story. It's a story about a young African-American coach down in Coosahatchee, South Carolina, which I thought was, the way it's spelled, I thought it was Coosawhatchee, but it's actually pronounced Coosahatchee. And in the low country of South Carolina in 1985, where he finds out that he has the #1 recruit in the nation.
Wow.
And so he finds himself in the middle of a national recruiting war when all these college coaches want this particular player. However, this particular player is mentally challenged. And he is a good boy, but he's mentally challenged. He's grown up in the swamp basically his entire life. And this coach wants to protect this innocent young man from the evils of the world. As we all know, they're out there. It's really funny, when I did my research on this book, Coach Danny Ford of Clemson won the national championship in football in 1981. Do you know how much money he was making then?
No.
$50,000 a year. The next year, he got a pay raise, $25,000 pay raise. And when I went back and looked at the newspapers, people from Clemson were going crazy because they said, how can we pay somebody that kind of money? $75,000 a year. Well, the current coach at Clemson now makes about $11 million, I think it is, the last time I looked.
That's ridiculous.
So anyway, times certainly have changed. But this story is really about the influence that the young man's head coach and his assistant coach have on him. The head coach is a Korean War veteran, Coach Hanover in this book. And he served in Korea, and he has a huge impact, a positive impact on this young man as they go through the process. Now, I can't tell you which school he ends up signing with because that's the big secret. The big secret of the story is which school is going to persuade this young man to sign with him. And the other thing is that the boy has to do with his parents, who his father has a prayer life that is fickle, because every time one of the new coaches comes in to recruit, he believes that the Lord wants him to go to this school instead of the last school or the other. So that's kind of the funny part about the story. But there's a love affair in it. There's all kind of little hidden gems of South Carolina throughout, because we're near Charleston, we're near Savannah, we're near Beaufort, in the location that I picked to do the story. So anyway, this is What a Crowd, and I hope that you'll enjoy it, and even the people that don't know anything about football will enjoy this story. Helen Bradley, the author of Breach of Trust, after she read it, she told me, she goes, I know this is a football story, but I don't really care anything about football, but it's a really good story. And so thank you, Helen, for giving me confidence to share this with everybody else. If anybody's got any questions about the book or the process that I've gone through, or
Did you have to ask Reggie Dean for his permission to give them?
I didn't ask him. I should.
Was he our Reggie Dean, or did you just say?
It was our Reggie. Let me tell you why I use Reggie Dean. You all, how many of you know Reggie Dean? Everybody knows Reggie Dean. The reason I used Reggie was because when I first went to Lugoff, Jimmy Neal and I were having lunch one day. And Jimmy Neal told me, he said, let me tell you one thing. Everybody in Camden knows Reggie Dean's in charge of this school. He said, there's no doubt. He said, I believe that when I die and go to heaven, I will still be answering to Reggie Dean. And when he said that, it stuck in my head all these years. And so the character, obviously I spoke to Reggie after the fact, and I should have called him and told him, but he's more prominent in the sequel, than he is in this one. And so, I just used the name really, but he becomes a character in the second one. And it's because I wanted to use a principle, and local people would know this, but people outside of our locale would not know it. But Reggie Dean ran Camden High School. There was no doubt he was the boss. Now, you might not like everything he did, but there was no doubt he was the boss. And I always thought that was a great example of how an administrator should run a school. And so that's why I use Reggie. I'm glad you asked me that. That was pretty cool.
In your book that you're writing about coaches' wives,
Yeah.
do you have anything in there about, like, as the coach's wife, like when Pat Summit came to scout a girl on Mike's basketball team, it was Big J that got to entertain Pat Summit and talk to her, and do you have anything in there about how the coaches' wives do everything while the coach is coaching?
All right, I'll give you a little tidbit information. The book is centered around 3 coaches' wives. The head coach of the football team is a wife. That defensive coordinator and offensive coordinator's wives. They're all different people. Now, they know each other because of Friday Night Football, but they don't know each other. It's kind of like colleagues at school, okay? And so the opening scene of the book, not the opening scene, but several chapters into the book, they all have to go to a hot dog supper because the head coach demands that the wives be there. Now, this is something that I encountered all the time in my career, where the head coaches...
Our husbands would have demanded that we cook the supper.
Exactly.
That's what would
Right.
have happened to us.
So the opening scene is they end up at this spring football game, and they're all mad because all 3 of them have had horrible days at work. And they're both, they're complaining, and they're saying, I know we have to be here, but this is the last place that I want to be tonight,
Yeah.
And I could hear my wife saying that.
What's the set, what time frame is?
2019.
Okay, so it's more current.
This is current.
See, that's why y'all would have to cook it instead of.
But this is more current, and we're talking cell phones, we're talking modern, a lot of modern technology in this one, and so Liz can attest. But I can't really give away the story because it's. I think it's a really good story. It's intriguing. There's some Richmond, Virginia in it, and the reason is because my oldest daughter, she's doing her 3rd year of residency in Richmond at VCU, and we've spent some time in Richmond, and I can't really say I've fallen in love with Richmond, but I have and I haven't. But I love the old places in Richmond, and so I want to write more about Richmond. I've written about Charleston. The sequel centers more on Charleston, and this book centers on Charleston as well. But in my future writings, I would like to write more about Richmond. I think Richmond is a very interesting town, like Charleston. And so, anyway, that's that.
When are the new books coming out?
I'm hoping. I'm in negotiation with somebody right now, but I'm hoping by Christmas. But there's all kind of different trains of thought about publishing books. Some people say do one a year. And I saw an author the other day on YouTube who said, you know what, my biggest mistake was doing it that way. My readers got bored. There's so many other things out there to read. They forgot about me, and I lost readership because of that. So she said, I did 5 books 2 years ago, and my sales exploded. She said because by the time I would do one like every 2 months, and so I said, well, you're a prolific writer because there's no way I could do that. And Liz would be like, no, you can't do that. you got to slow down.
But if you have it in you, go ahead and do it.
Well, that's my wife and I talked about that the other day, and I said, Bridget, I think I'm just going to start as fast as I can publish them. And the other thought is, if I'm going to have to get out and do all the work, I might as well get all the profit and just self-publish and do the best that we can. I mean, let's face it, I'm not going to be a New York Times bestseller. That's never going to happen. But my goal is to get it out there, and hopefully there are people that would enjoy the stories that I produce. And if people don't enjoy them, then I'll know. Nobody will buy them. And so far, that hadn't been the case. We've had good reviews on all the books. And so, as long as people give good reviews and people are interested in what I'm doing, I'll continue to do it. But it's been I'll probably do it anyway, just because it's been so much fun. I've met so many wonderful people. It's been amazing. Last week at the Lizard Man Stomp in Bishopville, I met the real Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown from Hartsville, South Carolina. He was the first person to buy a book. He came up, he's 76 years old, and he came up to me and said, I'm Charlie Brown, and I about fell out. And so you are. And he said, you don't believe me, do you? And he pulled out his license and showed it to me, and we started a great conversation. And he had ridden over from Hartsville on his motorcycle, 76 years old, just full of life. And he said, I've been married to the same woman for 58 years. I've lived in the same house for 58 years. And he said, guess what? He said, we're still having fun. And I said, you know what? That's the kind of outlook that we all need to have. The same outlook that Great Aunt Tessie had in Echo, Alabama. She drove until she was 97, and she would take me with her to the nursing home so that she could play the piano for the old people. And I used to laugh. I would say, this woman is unbelievable. And so, I've had great examples in my life with people with positive influences, coaches, teachers, and that's probably what saved me, because I fight depression every day. I don't mind telling you that. I don't mind sharing that with people. People that know me know that's a real thing with me. But to fight that depression, I have to stay busy.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key. I've learned that in the past 3 years, that you have to stay active as much as you can. My mother passed away in January of this year, bless her heart. But she had the greatest attitude. She survived 4 strokes, and the 5th one got her. But during the 4th stroke period, she would tell me, she goes, I'm just going to keep fighting. I'm just going to keep fighting. And that's the way we all have to be. We're all going to face hard times. We're all going to face these things. But for us to get through it, we've got to rely on the Lord. And we just got to keep pushing through. So anyway, enough about that. Any other questions?